The streets of Los Angeles had always been a mix of glitz and grit, a city where the rich and famous walked the same boulevards as those struggling just to get by. On this particular evening, the warm glow of the setting sun painted the city in hues of gold and orange. It was the kind of sunset that could make anyone pause for a moment, taking in its fleeting beauty. Among the rush of cars and the hum of city life, one man sat in his black motorcycle helmet, quietly observing the world around him at a red light. Keanu Reeves, known worldwide for his humble demeanor and countless movie roles, was on his way home from a low-key meeting. He preferred life this way, simple, no entourage, no fanfare. For Keanu, blending into the background had always been part of his charm. But as the light turned green and he gently revved his engine, something caught his eye that made him pause. Parked on the side of the street was an old rusted sedan, its windows cracked open slightly to let in the cool evening air. At first glance, it looked like just another car left behind in a city that never stopped moving. But a closer look told a different story. Through the faint glow of a street lamp above, Keanu could make out a figure slumped in the driver's seat. It wasn't just any figure, it was a woman, and in her arms, she cradled a baby wrapped in a worn blanket. The sight sent a strange pang through Keanu's chest, one he couldn't quite ignore. He pulled over a little further down the street, shutting off his engine and removing his helmet. For a moment he hesitated. People living on the streets were not an unusual sight in Los Angeles, but something about this scene felt different. He could sense the weight of their struggle, even from a distance. The woman looked exhausted, her head resting against the steering wheel. Her clothes, though clean, were visibly worn, and her hands trembled as she adjusted the blanket around the baby. She didn't notice Keanu standing there, her focus entirely on the tiny bundle in her arms. Keanu didn't know her story yet, why she was here, what had led her to this point, but he felt an undeniable pull to find out. As someone who had faced his own share of loss and heartache, he couldn't simply walk away. He knew what it was like to feel invisible, to battle pain in silence. Before approaching, Keanu glanced around. The street was mostly quiet, with only a few pedestrians rushing by, lost in their own lives. No one else seemed to notice the woman or her baby. He took a deep breath and began walking toward the car, his boots scuffing lightly against the pavement. As he got closer, the woman finally noticed him. Her eyes darted up, filled with equal parts fear and weariness. She instinctively pulled the baby closer to her chest, as if to shield it from whatever might come next. "Hey," Keanu said softly, raising his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. "I don't mean to scare you. I saw you here, and I wanted to check if you're okay." The woman didn't respond immediately. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. Instead, she just stared at him, her expression a mix of hesitation and disbelief. Keanu wasn't sure if she recognized him, but that didn't matter. He wasn't here as a celebrity. He was just a guy trying to help. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're fine. You don't have to worry about us." But the quiver in her voice told a different story. Keanu crouched slightly to meet her eye level, his gaze soft and earnest. "I know you don't know me," he said gently, "but maybe there's something I can do to help. Can I get you some food, water, anything you need?" The woman hesitated again, clearly torn between pride and desperation. I don't want to be a burden," she murmured, her grip on the baby tightening. "You're not a burden," Keanu assured her. "Sometimes we all need a little help." For a moment, the tension between them hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. The baby let out a soft cry, breaking the silence. The woman looked down, her face etched with worry as she tried to soothe the child. Keanu stood there, unsure of what else to say but determined not to walk away. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small wad of cash. "Here," he said, extending it toward her. "This isn't much, but it might help a little." The woman looked at the money, then back at Keanu, her eyes welling with tears. But before she could take it, or refuse, a loud honk shattered the moment. A car behind them, impatient and blaring its horn, reminded Keanu of where they were. He stepped back slightly, giving her space. "Listen," he said quickly, "I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable. But if you need a place to stay or anything else, let me help you. Please." The woman didn't respond, her emotions clearly overwhelming her. Keanu glanced around again, sensing the growing attention from nearby passersby. He didn't want to pressure her, but he also couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was happening for a reason. As he turned back to her, the woman finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Why are you doing this?" Keanu smiled faintly, his expression warm but serious. "Because everyone deserves kindness," he said simply. The woman opened her mouth to reply, but before she could, a sudden noise from down the street drew both of their attention, a commotion that neither of them had expected. And in that instant, the night took a turn that would change everything. The sound echoed through the quiet street, sharp and unexpected. Keanu and the woman both turned their heads toward the source of the noise. A group of teenagers running past, their laughter bouncing off the walls of the surrounding buildings. It wasn't anything serious, but it was enough to startle the baby, who let out a piercing cry. The woman's hands trembled as she tried to comfort her child, whispering soft words that didn't seem to ease the baby's distress. Keanu watched her struggle, his heart heavy. There was something about her, something more than the exhaustion in her eyes or the worn-down look of her clothes. It was the way she moved, the way she held her baby with such protectiveness, even when she seemed so close to breaking. It was clear she had been carrying a burden far too heavy for one person to bear. Keanu crouched down again, speaking gently. "Hey, let me help. I don't want to intrude, but maybe I can make things a little easier for you tonight. Just tell me what you need." The woman hesitated, her eyes darting between him and her car. It was as if she was weighing her options, caught between accepting help and holding on to her pride. Finally, she sighed, her voice barely audible. "We don't need much. Just maybe some diapers for the baby and a little food." Keanu nodded immediately. "Okay, stay here. I'll be right back." Without another word, he turned and walked briskly toward the small convenience store down the street. The woman watched him go, still unsure if she could trust this stranger. She had learned long ago not to expect kindness from people, not in a world where survival often meant looking out for yourself. But there was something different about him, something genuine. And though she didn't fully understand why, she let herself hope, just for a moment, that he might actually care. Inside the store, Keanu quickly gathered the essentials: diapers, baby formula, a few bottles of water, and some snacks. As he stood in line to pay, his mind wandered. He couldn't stop thinking about the woman and her baby, wondering what had led them to this point. He knew how unforgiving life could be, how easily things could fall apart. And he knew, too, that sometimes all it took was one small gesture to remind someone they weren't alone. When he returned to the car, the woman was still there, rocking the baby gently in her arms. She looked up as he approached, her expression a mix of relief and uncertainty. Keanu handed her the bags, his tone light and reassuring. "I got a little extra, just in case. Hope that's okay." The woman nodded, her voice trembling as she said, "Thank you. You didn't have to do this." Keanu shook his head. "It's nothing. Really." For a moment, they stood in silence, the city noise filling the space between them. Then almost reluctantly, the woman spoke. My name's Rachel, she said quietly. And this is Lily. Keanu smiled, glancing at the baby. Hi, Lily, he said softly. You've got a pretty amazing mom. Rachel looked down, her cheeks flushing with a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. I'm just trying to get by, she murmured. It's been a rough year. Keanu didn't push for details, sensing that Rachel wasn't ready to share more. Instead, he leaned against the side of the car, his voice calm and steady. You know, I've been through some rough times too. Sometimes it feels like things will never get better. But they do. I promise. Rachel looked at him, her eyes searching his face for something. Truth, maybe, or hope. Do they? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu nodded. Yeah, they do. As the night wore on, Rachel began to open up, her words halting at first, but gradually gaining strength. She told Keanu about the series of events that had led her here. The unexpected job loss, the mounting bills, the landlord who had given her no choice but to leave. She had no family to turn to, no safety net. All she had was her car and her determination to protect her baby at all costs. Keanu listened intently, his heart breaking with every word. He thought about all the people who fell through the cracks, the ones who worked so hard and still found themselves struggling. And he thought about how easy it was for others to look away, to pretend they didn't see. But he couldn't look away. Not now. Not ever. As Rachel finished her story, her voice thick with emotion, Keanu made a decision. You don't have to go through this alone, he said firmly. I can help you. Not just tonight, but for as long as you need. Rachel blinked, her eyes filling with tears. Why would you do that? You don't even know me. Keanu smiled faintly, his voice steady. Because I've been where you are. And because I can. For the first time in what felt like forever, Rachel let herself believe that things might actually get better. But as she wiped her tears and glanced down at Lily, the faint sound of sirens in the distance brought her back to reality. Something was happening, and it was getting close, both sensing that the night wasn't over yet. And as the sirens grew louder, the tension in the air thickened, leaving them both wondering what was about to unfold. The sound of the sirens grew louder, their wail cutting through the stillness of the night. Rachel instinctively clutched Lily closer, her body tensing. Keanu noticed the fear flashing in her eyes, the way her grip tightened protectively around her daughter. He turned his head toward the noise, scanning the street for any sign of what might be happening. A police cruiser sped past them, its lights casting a red and blue glow on the buildings nearby. Then another followed, heading toward the main road. Whatever the commotion was, it wasn't meant for them. Rachel let out a shaky breath, relief washing over her face. I thought, she started, her voice trailing off. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Keanu understood. It's okay, he said softly, his tone reassuring. They're not here for you. Rachel nodded, though her hands still trembled. The weight of her situation wasn't something that disappeared easily. For months, she'd lived in survival mode, always on edge, always wondering if someone might come and take Lily away. It was exhausting, and it had worn her down in ways she didn't even realize until now. Keanu stood beside her car, his mind racing. He'd helped people before, donated to causes, and supported charities, but this felt different. This wasn't just about giving money or temporary relief. This was about changing someone's life. And as he looked at Rachel and her baby, he knew he couldn't walk away, not after everything she had shared. Rachel, he began carefully, I think you deserve a real chance, a fresh start. If you're willing, I'd like to help you get there. Rachel frowned slightly, unsure of what he meant. What do you mean? You've already done so much. Keanu shook his head. This isn't enough. You and Lily need a safe place to stay, somewhere warm and secure. You shouldn't have to live like this. Let me help you find something better. Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes again. But why? Why would you do this for us? We're strangers. Kinu's expression softened. Because I've seen what kindness can do. When I was younger, there were people who helped me when I didn't expect it, when I didn't think I deserved it. And I promised myself that if I ever had the chance, I'd do the same for someone else. It's not charity, Rachel. It's just human. Rachel stared at him, her walls breaking down with every word. For so long, she had felt invisible, like the world had forgotten about her and Lily. But here was this man, a complete stranger, offering her something she had barely allowed herself to dream of: hope. Keanu pulled out his phone and made a few quick calls. Within minutes, he had arranged a room for Rachel and Lily at a nearby hotel, a place where they could stay for the time being. He even called a friend who worked with a local nonprofit that helped families in crisis, making sure they could connect with resources and support. When he looked back at Rachel, she was crying, but this time it wasn't out of fear or despair. It was gratitude. "I don't even know how to thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "You've done more for us in one night than anyone has in months." Keanu smiled, his tone light but sincere. "You don't have to thank me. Just promise me one thing." Rachel wiped her tears, nodding. "Anything. Promise me that you'll believe things can get better. For you and for Lily. Because they will." Rachel nodded again, her heart swelling with a feeling she hadn't experienced in so long. "Hope. I promise." Keanu stayed with Rachel until a taxi arrived to take her and Lily to the hotel. As they left, she turned to look at him one last time, her eyes filled with something she couldn't quite put into words. He waved, watching as the car disappeared down the street. The night grew quiet again, the city settling into its usual rhythm. Keanu put his helmet back on, swung the leg over his motorcycle, and started the engine. As he rode off, he couldn't stop thinking about Rachel and Lily, about the strength it took for her to keep going despite everything she had faced. He knew their journey wasn't over, but he also knew they had taken a step forward, a step toward something better. And in a world that could often feel cold and unforgiving, that small glimmer of hope was everything. Sometimes Keanu thought it wasn't about changing the whole world. Sometimes it was about changing one person's world. And as he disappeared into the night, he felt a quiet sense of peace, knowing he had done just that.